Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the closing night of the 2025 Penn World Voices Festival. Woo! Yes, let's celebrate. It's been a few days. Yeah, my name is Sabir Sultan, and I'm the director of the festival, and I want to thank you all for joining us over these past 4 days. When I opened the festival 4 days ago, it was with the acknowledgement that free expression and free speech were under threat and attack in our country and abroad. In the face of all of this, I proffered the belief that a literary festival could be an antidote to these times, that there was power in writing, literature, and dialogue, that hearing from international writers would have an expansive effect on all of us, allowing us to reconsider our own stories, the personal and the national, in new lights. We would come to understand that we exist as part of a global community, that our struggles, our fears, our hopes, our dreams are not unique. After 4 days of conversation, with events ranging from the craft of horror writing to the act of dialogues in poetry to the climate crises facing us and more, I think I was right. The conversations these past few days were a testament to the materiality of dialogue, that words have mass, momentum, weight, and impact, that discussions between writers, journalists, translators, and artists could leave us changed. At an event last night, a writer who was in Colombia during the COVID-19 lockdown shared a story. She spoke of how people like a mango seller who made the wages they needed to live day to day were left bereft, unable to work, that the government offered no financial support to help them. After enough of an outcry over the lack of food, the mayor told the city's people that if they did not have enough to eat, they should hang a red handkerchief outside of their window. The city would bring them food. The author then saw buildings with red in every window. In the face of this mass hunger and a government that did not address it, it was the people who organized to feed each other, who shared their resources to help each other. She said that this was where she found hope in community. In Union Square earlier this week and in Astor Place today, the Afghani artivists, art lords, invited the public to join them in painting a mural that called for peace and hope. People shared messages in Greek, Kurdish, Chinese, and of course English. They prayed for peace, they touted joy as an act of resistance, and even wrote jokes. I've heard Romanian, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, Uyghur, and other languages spoken across our stages these past 4 days. Earlier today, an Iraqi-American poet and an Iranian-American novelist sat on this stage and joked they were supposed to be enemies. I share these highlights because all of these moments were indelible. I will think of them, mine meaning from them, and try to understand that this place in time we find ourselves in. The festival matters. This is our 20th Penn World Voices Festival, and since 2005, the festival has stayed true to its original mission, to celebrate the power of storytelling and literature and translation, and to convene global voices across borders, language, and culture. We hope you will join us next year and the year after. And so I want to thank our members and our bookstore partner in the back tonight, PT Knitwear. I also want to share special thanks to the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, the Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council of the Arts, and the Amazon Literary Partnership for their invaluable support of our work. We're additionally grateful to Total Caption for helping us to increase accessibility for more readers and writers by providing live captioning for this event. I also want to thank the festival team, without whom none of these near 40 events could have happened. Our producer, Natasha Katerinopolis, the festival manager, Sarah Dillard, and our team of festival consultants and volunteers. I also want to make sure to thank our amazing production company, Q&A, and specifically Jody Q and Megan Murphy, but also their incredible team who's made sure every event has run seamlessly and have shown an incredible amount of care for our writers and audiences. And now, I am especially pleased to introduce our closing night event, Under Siege, The Perils of Journalism in an Age of State Repression, with Rana Ayub of The Washington Post, George Packer of The Atlantic, Patricia Evangelista of Rappler, and moderator Summer Lopez. It will be an urgent conversation about the escalating dangers journalists face when governments target the press, and will explore how government repression not only silences and endangers the media, but also emboldens other dangerous actors who now feel that they have the license to attack journalists. Rana Ayub is an Indian investigative journalist and a global opinions writer who has reported extensively on majoritarian politics and violence, extrajudicial killings by the state, Islamophobia, and communalism. George Packer is a journalist, an award-winning author and playwright who writes about American politics, culture, and U.S. foreign policy. Patricia Evangelista is a trauma journalist and author of the book Some People Need Killing, a memoir of murder in my country, an account of the Philippines drug war, which was a New York Times top 10 best books of the year. Summer Lopez is the interim co-CEO and chief program officer of Free Expressions program at PEN America. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you to our writers for agreeing to take part in what will be a wonderful event. And now I am done talking, so please join me in welcoming Rana, George, and Summer to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to just give one more shout out to Sabir Sultan, who has made this festival possible. He's amazing. It's been an incredible 4 days. I want to give special thanks and welcome to Pat, who is joining us from Manila, where I believe it is 6 a.m. So I've been assured you have coffee. And we can see her here, and we're going to try to look at her there. So if it looks strange when we're talking to her, that's because that's where the camera is. So, but we're so glad to have you here too, Pat.
Good morning from Manila.
Good morning. Before we dive in, I want to first note that we are appropriately gathering on World Press Freedom Day. And this is a day on which we both celebrate the principles of press freedom and the courageous journalists who carry out that work, like the folks we're about to hear from. And we recognize the need to defend those principles and those journalists, and to stand up for press freedom wherever it is under attack. And it is very much under attack in many places today. Reporters Without Borders released their annual report on the state of global press freedom yesterday. Their analysis saw the state of press freedom globally drop from the category of problematic to difficult overall for the first time ever. The Committee to Protect Journalists recorded more deaths of journalists in 2024 than in any year in its history, with at least 124 journalists and media workers killed last year, nearly 2/3 of them Palestinian. CPJ also found more journalists in prison last year than ever before, with at least 361 journalists behind bars as of December 1st of last year. And obviously the situation in this country has deteriorated rapidly in the last 103 days, I believe it is now. The administration has attempted to destroy the U.S. Agency for Global Media, cut off government funding for PBS and NPR, and launched investigations into NBC, ABC, CBS, and other outlets. President Trump has called CNN's and MSNBC's reporting illegal, and he and Elon Musk have both called for individual journalists to be fired. We know such rhetoric can have much broader effects. But these tactics aren't new. They're part of playbooks that we see in many countries. And so first I want to ask each of you to reflect a little bit on the moment that we're in, and maybe to say in a few sentences how you personally define the purpose of journalism and how you see that purpose being thwarted and attacked in this moment. Rana, do you want to start?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in to listen to each one of us, especially people like us who are jet lagged. I came in from India day before yesterday, and it's like 5 a.m. there, so forgive me if I kind of stammer a bit. Um, it's World Press Freedom Day today, and I must remind you that I have to take court permission to travel outside of the country, and that speaks volumes of press freedom in the world's largest democracy. I mean, since the last 3 days, I've been having conversations about the attack on press freedom, and we talk about countries like China and Russia. Nobody speaks about India in the same breath. Nobody believes that India, the land of yoga and Ayurveda and democracy, really would see the kind of state repression that we are witnessing right now. But it is really, I mean, RCEP has called Prime Minister Modi a predator of the free press, which has not been said before. We have gone from democratic to partly democratic by multiple journalism and democratic indices. As a journalist, I think that, you know, when I come to US, I still see some voices from legacy media, mainstream publications speaking the truth and putting on headlines on the front page. In India, that's gone completely missing in the last couple of years. In fact, I feel like, I mean, Modi came to power in 2014. I still feel like 2015 seemed like a great year and 2016 seemed like a great year. And now it's just like, I don't think there is a voice of dissidence. You know, we just had the attack in Kashmir, and you saw news channels cheering for war. And there wasn't space for any rational voice to say, hey, what about the intelligence failure? If anybody does question that, 3 days ago, 2 Instagram influencers who are also stand-up comedians were charged with sedition for just questioning the security lapses by the Indian state. So that's what we're talking about. We are talking about the world's largest democracy being the biggest predator of the free press. Some of us who were gainfully employed earlier are now independent journalists and consultants, and that speaks volumes. Some of the most important work in journalism in India is being done by independent journalists who are not affiliated with publications. And that's what I think being a journalist means. Just 2 months ago, I was slapped with another FIR. I was booked for hurting communal sentiments of the majority population for a tweet I made in 2012. 13 years later, they realized that apparently my tweets are dangerous to the country. So in that atmosphere, journalism becomes more important because we have to be a witness. And that's the job of journalists, is to be a witness. Despite the state repression, my bank accounts, my assets are frozen. I still stay with my family. The kind of harassment that I have faced is unprecedented. I've been called one of the 10 most threatened journalists in the world. I'm followed, stalked. Last year, the intelligence guys followed me everywhere when I went on a reporting trip. Despite all of this, when I go to sleep at night every day, I sleep with my conscience telling me that you've done your job, and that's what journalism means to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, let's go to you.
Hi. I think I'll keep it simple. I think journalism is about keeping a record. In 2016, Rodrigo Duterte, our former president, promised to slaughter his people because of the scourge of illegal drugs. He promised to murder criminals, drug users, drug addicts, drug dealers. And he said it was a wonderful thing, and he was applauded for it. At the height of the drug war, thousands were killed. Every night, a dozen, 20, 30. And on the day that his policemen in a single city within a single night killed 32, President Duterte went up to a podium and said, "What a beautiful thing. And perhaps more should die so that the drug scourge could end." To operate as a journalist under crisis conditions, you have to work under negotiated expectations. You don't think about impact because people applaud the extraordinary, the brutal. I think of journalism as keeping a record. That the reason we do what we do is because while political moments are fleeting, the atrocities are not. So you write about the terrible because someday accountability might matter. And even if it doesn't, the fact of the record is accountability in itself. And I guess that's what we do. We tell the story, no matter if no one is listening.
Thank you. George, what do you think?
Well, first, it's an honor to be with Rana and Pat. They're heroes. They're great journalists, and they inspire those of us in this country who don't yet have to take the risks that they take in order to do our job. What is journalism for? I think they both said it right. I would say it's for two things: to hold the powerful to account. And the powerful can be state power, it can be financial power, it can even be social power. It can be the power of a mob. And to tell the stories of people who can't tell their own stories. A record is a good word for it, witness is a good word for it, and that keeps us a bit modest about what we can do. Because holding the powerful to account seldom really results in justice. It usually results in having a record that anyone who cares enough to look it up can find, and maybe one day we'll find some measure of justice, or at least history will have something to say about the abuses of power, of the powerful. For me, the great threat, there are many threats coming at us right now in this country. They're nothing like the threats under Duterte. They're not even like the threats under Modi. But for me, the most worrying is our own irrelevance. It's who is listening? Who are we reaching? Which part of the country believes us? How can we get them to believe us if they don't? Do we even have a common reality? Or has truth slowly begun to disappear? And everyone is now quite capable of producing their own reality, which has the consequences of creating a society that's falling to pieces. For me, that's the real danger going on in this country right now. Of course, the powerful, starting with the president, are doing everything they can to push that, to accelerate that trend. But we journalists have to think hard about what we might be doing that's contributing, or at least failing to stop it, and how we can reach those in the country and around the world who've lost faith in us, or who think we're liars or corrupt or on the take. What they don't know is, and this goes for people who ought to know better, is how hard we work to get the facts right. How much goes in to reporting a story, fact-checking that story, copy editing it, running it up the chain through editors, going back to the sources, and then going maybe to the target and saying, here's what we're saying about you. What do you have to say about that? It's an extraordinary effort to be fair and to be true. And I don't quite know why we've become the enemy of the people, but we have.
Thank you for that, and you've touched on something that I did want to come back to as well, because I think we've talked over time about sort of the erosion of truth as something that underlies a lot of what we're seeing right now. And Rana, I know you've written about the dangers of disinformation and seen that, you know, wielded as a tool against you, as well as something that undermines democracy more broadly. I'm wondering if you want to say a little bit about how that has played out in India in particular.
I mean, disinformation, misinformation, I mean, the kind of propaganda that really enables leaders like Trump, Modi, Netanyahu, I mean, it's in a country like India, for instance. I remember one of the heads of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee was in India, and somebody distorted his statement saying that Modi is the top contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. And then every person in the country, including top ministers, were tweeting that, right? And by the time this person put out a clarification, it had almost reached every single household. So by the time fact-checkers fact-check that, it has already reached the target audience, which relies on WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. The truth does not really matter to them. And disinformation, like, you know, has played a critical role. I mean, people like us are victims of that, because the kind of, narrative that Modi has set about journalists who write for foreign publications, for instance, is that they get paid in dollars, they have offshore accounts, they have swanky properties, they work for foreign publications because they are funded by ISI, CIA, blah, 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 and people believe that. Because when something is repeated time and again through multiple platforms which are aligned with the right wing, people tend to believe that more than the voice of the truth. And that's what is affecting the credibility of the media. When the mainstream media, the legacy media also, for instance, I'll give an example. I mean, again, it's a personal example. The UN put out a statement in solidarity with me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and India then put out a counter statement. So the Indian media's headline was, India lashes out at the UN's statement on Rana Ayub, not about what the UN said. So disinformation is not just on social media. It's also happening insidiously by mainstream publications. It has made Modi this larger-than-life character that, Trump is scared of Modi, Biden has given him state honors because Indian passport is now the most valued passport in the world, and people feel emboldened and they feel empowered that, okay, Modi has done this for the country. So I think misinformation has played a big role in these leaders having the kind of power, exerting that kind of power. And unfortunately, there are multiple fact-checking websites in India, but they're very niche. They reach a very niche audience. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, yes, they have democratized voices in absence of gatekeepers. For instance, people like us who did not have a job since Modi came to power. I wrote a book which was self-published without a publisher. So Twitter played a great role in telling the world that, hey, I have this book out there which you should read. At the same time, it has played a significant role in kind of amplifying the fake news and hatred against us. Just yesterday there is an image of me with Osama bin Laden, which is circulating on social media. I mean, they don't even realize the time difference and the age difference, right? I mean, that's how it works, right? I mean, they don't even want to put two and two together and say, hey, this can't work. In the world of disinformation, reality does not work. Truth does not work, and truth, and at the end of the day, is the ultimate casualty in this era of misinformation and disinformation.
So how should journalists proceed in this environment?
I mean, there's a temptation to say, ban Twitter, ban the people on Twitter, ban all the platforms we don't like. That's a slippery slope. And on World Press Freedom Day, you don't want to be in a position to be saying world press freedom for everyone except the people I don't like.
Not the position of our free expression organization.
I mean, there is a fix. I don't think it'll ever happen, which is to hold Zuckerberg, Musk, and the other owners of those platforms accountable for libel, which is what The Atlantic is held accountable for, and the New York Times, and Rana and Pat. We are all subject to the rule of law. If we, in this country, it's a very strict standard. If we knowingly, recklessly, maliciously say something false about someone that hurts them in some way, we can be held liable. That's called defamation. Why is it that these multi-billionaire owners of these incredibly powerful publishers, they are publishers, are not held accountable? It's because of something called Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I mean, who knows? It's just some tiny little thing that they very shrewdly managed to get inserted into a law before anyone even knew what social media would be. And now it allows Musk to flood us with falsehoods on Twitter, and for him to pay no damage except reputational, which he doesn't care about. So that would be, for me, the simplest and most press freedom friendly way. Yes, there's press freedom. There's also constraints and rules, which we all live with, except for some reason, the guys who own the platform. So that's my little idea that will never happen. I don't know. Does anyone have a better idea for how to prevent disinformation? Maybe don't dismantle the State Department's Center for Global Engagement, which was set up in order to prevent Putin from interfering with our elections, which he does time after time after time. Of course, Trump doesn't want it to exist because he benefits from that interference. And so now we no longer have the ability to defend ourselves as a country from foreign malevolent actors who are flooding us with lies in order to undermine our democracy. So that would be another way. Maybe don't do that.
Thank you. Pat, I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, in part because, I mean, I've heard Maria Ressa talk about, who's the co-founder of Rappler, Pat's outlet in the Philippines, about how Rappler wouldn't exist without Facebook and social media. That was key to its sort of ability to become an outlet that was able to reach people. And yet, obviously, these platforms have also become tools that are wielded against the truth and against journalists and destructive in a completely different way.
Just a clarification, I'm formerly from Rappler.
Yes.
I'm a freelancer now, but then, you know, given the economic trends, maybe technically I don't have a job. I would think, I agree, it's hard to hit misinformation, and I come from a place where the former president would directly call journalists fake news. The journalists themselves, not even the work that they do. My answer to that would be a little broader, I think. I think every autocrat speaks in the language of righteousness. You know, everyone follows through after. But the language is always big and broad and bold. You know, a rallying cry for patriots to defend the nation. Then you'll pick up whatever fake news comes after. I think what we do is, it's necessary always to clarify the specifics, to break down the rhetoric. And on my end, because there are many different ways for journalists to do it, on my end, I ground it in the specific. Autocrats like to say that criminals or drug addicts or immigrants or journalists or feminists or activists don't deserve the rights other people do. My job is mostly to ground that in the reality of the everyday, in the people who pay the price, in the lived reality. It's essentially giving the authority back to the vulnerable instead of the morality of your autocrat. So if you talk about killing or murder, it's the coffin in the living room. It's the pink raincoat that's never going to be worn. It's the wife who discovers her husband's body on the ground and recognizes only his feet. So yes, we correct what is wrong, but we also tell the other stories. The people who are attacked, the people who pay the price, what happens to them?
Thank you for that. I'm thinking a little bit about what you said in the context of a comment from Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who was in one of the panels a few nights ago. I have the benefit of getting to refer back to all the other conversations that have happened over the past few days. She's a scholar of authoritarianism, and she was talking about moral collapse as something that authoritarians facilitate. She said that they roll back civic and ethical norms against defrauding, silencing, bullying, and physically harming others, that those are norms that we inculcate in democratic societies, and that it's part of the authoritarian project to break those down. And I think that's a pretty overt part of the playbook we see from leaders like Duterte and Modi and Trump. So I think you've spoken a little bit to my question about that, which was, you know, how can journalists counter that? Because I think it's also a piece of how they can lay the groundwork for violence, including violence against journalists, but also more broad violence. And I'm also thinking about, what does it mean to report on leaders like this who are kind of shameless about that, who can't really, who brag about killing people, who say they could kill somebody on Fifth Avenue and still win the election, who have, how do you sort of report on people who seem incapable of shame? Anybody?
Well, you go a little crazy first. The Dart Center has a word for it, for what journalists go through. Moral injury, where the ground shifts under your feet. I always thought journalism was an act of faith. You write about the terrible things because everyone else believes they're terrible. You all agree that murder is wrong, that human rights are good, And when you report on the terrible things, it's because you're saying it shouldn't happen again. And then one day we all woke up and we were told citizens would die because they were no longer human. So I think I'll lean on Orwell on that. The easiest way to do it is find out where you stand. The clearest point where you can stand, even if everything else has moved in front of you. So for me, even with extremely high approval rates for Mr. Duterte, former President Duterte, even with applause at the end of every speech, I had to keep remembering what they stood for. There's no such thing as objective journalism. You're biased because you're human. I thought that it mattered still that there was a bunch of people who were saying that these people shouldn't die. And for me, I had to keep going back to that, the ground on which I stood. And I wasn't alone there. There were thousands, millions of people who believed that. It's just that there wasn't enough for a long time.
Anyone else?
I think in this country, at least I have come to this unsettling feeling that the American people aren't who I thought they were, or at least a lot of them aren't. Do they care about due process, which is embedded in the Constitution? Do they care about free speech, which we're talking about? Or even simple decency, simple moral values? It's really unsettling when you had this notion of what your vocation was, which was you inform and a kind of moral transaction takes place where with the information, people then figure out what's true and false, what's right and wrong. And it's taken a long time for me to accept that that transaction doesn't happen. And instead, you just go about your work without that expectation. It's really hard to give it up. I haven't given it up even though I just said that. Because it's like I can't afford to. I wouldn't quite know what I was in it for if I lost that faith, but I am losing that faith. And I mean, and yet every day, I have to say, every day, there is still evidence that when a story about Elon Musk's raid on Social Security, or even USAID, which fewer people care about, is published, it does reach people. I've talked to them. I've talked to Trump supporters who were upset that Trump shut the door to refugees, including Afghans who had been waiting years to have the promise made to them that they would be taken care of if they were loyal to the Americans in their country. That door slammed shut. I know people whose lives are on the line right now because of it. That doesn't sit well even with some people who might support Trump. So as soon as I say I've lost that faith in the transaction, I realize, but I'm still operating as if maybe it's possible, because I wouldn't know how to operate otherwise. And it's a very unsettling time in this country where you just don't know, as Pat said, where the ground is solid, where the lines are, when you've crossed a line that puts you in a territory you've never been in. And that's why I'm listening to these two women, because they are much closer to, especially in the Philippines, but also in India, to a society in which that line has long since been crossed.
Yeah, I really got a first-hand experience, and I agree with you, because it's a very unsettling experience to see a majority or a big population of the country celebrate mob lynching of the minorities over consumption of beef, or ripping them off their citizenship status. And last year I was at an election rally, which is in a very middle-class Indian area, and it was a rally of the opposition leaders. And this was the time when there were a couple of big investigations on electoral bonds, through which the Prime Minister of the country was receiving big money from industrial houses. There was the investigation on Gautam Adani, the biggest industrialist, who's one of the richest men in the world. And when I asked people, right, what do you think about this corruption that's happening in the Modi administration? I mean, he's supposed to give you jobs. He's supposed to rid the country of unemployment. He came on the premise of getting India just rid of poverty. And the responses just, I'm glad I didn't tell them I was a Muslim myself. The responses really, it left me disappointed with my country. I should have already been, but they said that, at the end of the day, he has shown them their place. Them would be Muslims, their place. The children of Mughals, their place. The invaders, their place. Now no longer can anyone dare to question Hindu gods and Hindu mythology. Like this element of, this victimhood of the majority community, right? They're stoking the victimhood of the majority community. And it has been done so systematically. Modi does not work in a vacuum, or leaders like Modi do not operate in a vacuum. They operate in a space where a prejudice against the other already exists. He is only stoking the fire. So this prejudice, what the language that the average Indian is speaking, was already spoken of in the living rooms. It is now being made more respectable to speak that language in public discourse. For instance, I was having these conversations backstage that I'm in a WhatsApp group with certain Ivy League colleagues, and they said, but Rana, Muslims have so many countries. We Indians have just one country. Why can't we have a Hindu nation? And I said, but what did India bring to the table in a global context? The democracy. Our biggest asset was democracy, which is why the partition of the country took place. We are not an Islamic nation, we are not a Hindu nation, we're a democracy. But Modi is successful because this prejudice already exists. A journalist like me, I'm speaking in an echo chamber because there are people out there who do not see me as a journalist, but just a Muslim. A Muslim and a critic and a woman who hates the prime minister, who's out there to redeem us and redeem our respectability. I mean, here is a prime minister who in 2002 was the chief minister when 1,000 Muslims were massacred. Here is a prime minister who back in his day as a chief minister oversaw multiple fake extrajudicial murders. But the way it has been made respectable. Modi was not elected despite that. He was elected because he did that. And that is the most unsettling part of a democracy. And that is what, because he has isolated voices like ours. We are a minority in a minority. People who speak truth to power are seen as some kind of people who are out to destroy the credibility of the nation. Like, when we speak, I remember I posted about coming to this event and somebody said, oh, go and spew hate about our great nation. The way these leaders conflate the government with the country, right? Any criticism of Modi is seen as a criticism of India. And that's true of most dictators, right? They make it about themselves as the country themselves. And I think that's what it is. And so much so that I think last year I was speaking at an international event where a well-meaning journalist from India reached out and said, you know what, Rana, whatever you speak about Modi, but it's okay if you speak about that in India, but don't speak about that on an international platform. It's like, okay, so in India, we are not given those platforms to speak, right? All those spaces have been taken away from us, but we should not even be talking about it on an international platform because apparently that brings a bad image to India. Not the majoritarianism, not the anti-Muslim hatred, not the discrimination, not the fascism, but speaking truth to power. And that's the reason how these leaders flourish.
Thank you. I mean, I think, we are in the US right now feeling like we're kind of slipping down this slope that we have seen other countries go down. And I think, it's happening faster than people expected. I think the more has been done in this first 100 days, more damage, more destruction. But I do think it has real parallels. So I'm curious for Pat and Rana how you're looking at it from the outside, and also how is it impacting journalists internationally as well? Pat, do you want to go?
Well, on a very practical level, when I was about to publish the book, my book, about 2 years ago, it was not the safest time for me to be in the Philippines. I had interviewed vigilantes. There were people who were not pleased with me. I was not certain how the government would react. My publishing house decided it was not in my best interest to be in the Philippines. So I went to the US for my safety for a little bit of a while. Um, Now, I find that I am here in Manila because it is safer to be in Manila now than to cross the US border, which is why I'm sitting in my living room instead of that stage right now. Because who knows if the US decides I'm seeking asylum? I am not, just on the record, I am not. Um, it, it feels very strange to look at what's happening in the US, to see a place that celebrated free speech and human rights go down the way it's going. I've been speaking to a lot of my American journalist friends, and when I talk to them, it feels like us in 2016, 2017, just realizing that when an autocrat makes a promise and makes a threat, the moment he takes power, he will execute it. So it it feels terrifying because where America goes, the world reacts. I'm not certain if the word anymore is where America leads, but it's affecting all of us everywhere.
Thank you. Rana?
Well, Pat is right. I mean, people look up to America as this beacon of free speech and democracy. And then they see the unraveling here and they say, what's wrong with us? I mean, you look down upon us as this uncivilized nation and we are doing better than you are, right? I don't think that's true though, but yeah, but as you know, and it is worrying. I mean, earlier, when I used to come to the US, it would never, I mean, I do get an anxiety attack when I'm at the immigration queue at the Indian airports because I've been stopped twice from flying. So, you know, when you're in the immigration queue at the customs and the border control, you're scared, you're palpitating, you get sweaty hands. Now you do that when you're standing at the border control in America because you're like, everybody tells you to kind of clean up your phone, do not tweet anything which is offensive to Trump. So I think if one of the greatest democracies like America is unraveling the way it is, it gives other people the impunity and to act with impunity because they said if America can do this, why can't we? Because these are the people who have been claiming for the longest time that, you know, we tell the world how you should how you should behave with your press, how you should deal with your human rights. So I think earlier there used to be some sort of a check and balance, although America was never perfect, but there was to be some check and balance with the biggest democracies around the world, not just America, but also, for instance, the EU and other organizations who were keeping a check and balance on countries which were declining into that fascist tendency. I mean, you at least worried about the fact that it's not a good look. Right? It's not a good look, at least, that, you know, we cannot be seen as a fascist country, right? That, I think, no longer exists. They no longer fear, because they see what Trump is doing. I just saw this AI-generated image of Trump as the Pope, and these people that say, hey, what wrong is Modi doing when he poses as the incarnate of Lord Ram in India? Because look, America is doing the same thing. So I think this, and particularly for journalists, and particularly for institutions, right? We always say that in America, at least, the difference is there are institutions protecting the democracy. In India, it's not a level playing field anymore. It's literally one political party that calls the shots. So when they look at institutions, I mean, at some point, they will cave in. And you see universities already caving in. They look at that as an example and say, if they can restrict academic freedom, why can't we? Everybody's watching what's happening at Columbia, right? So if they can do it, why can't we? So I think America is leading the way for all the wrong things at this point of time.
I think I'd like to add to that, but I'll take it the other direction. For a lot of us who were reporting from crisis conditions, we would be asked why our stories matter to the rest of the world. And we would say it's a cautionary tale. What we're trying to say is it can happen anywhere. America is no exception. No institution is an exception. A charismatic man can stand in front of the audience, exaggerate, lie, and say, I will make the nation great again. It's not limited to a single country. So whether or not you think of yourself as the leaders of the free world, no one is exempt from autocracy. So resistance is a daily thing. The moment one thing is allowed, the moment we say, well, this is okay, this is ordinary, it doesn't affect me, then you go down the hill. We've seen it happen because it happened to us. And maybe we didn't tell the story right. Maybe we should have warned other people better, our own people. But it can happen to anyone. And when it happens to the United States, it really means it can happen to the rest of the world.
George?
Yeah, it's just a very strange time. I mean, you know, in some countries that are extremely repressive, a publication in English might get a bit of a pass because only the elites read it or very few people read it. And so, for example, in China or elsewhere, an English language paper might not be censored to the same degree as a paper in the language of the country. There are other cases around the world. I'm beginning to wonder if maybe the mainstream media is being treated a bit that way by Trump. Like, yeah, we'll let you go on publishing your op-eds and running your numerous stories. Because if you look at the Times or the Post or my magazine, The Atlantic, it's all Trump all the time, and it's overwhelmingly negative. So far, they're not coming for us. They may come for us in some way, but right now they seem to regard it as maybe a nuisance. Maybe we'll invite them in and talk to them and see if we can play a game with them, which is, you know, what Trump decided to do in letting some Atlantic editors and writers into the White House the other day. I'm beginning to wonder if they just don't take us seriously because it's the elite who read us, as if we were an English language paper in a non-English language country. And that's, in some ways, more of a, I don't know, corrosive threat than the idea that, okay, we might be subpoenaing your documents in order to find out who leaked it to you, which is something that they are, by the way, about to begin to do. They just lifted a rule against doing that. So this is back to my worry about being irrelevant. So it's a strange time where we're doing our jobs every day with a lot of energy, with an overwhelming amount of material every day, too much. It's dizzying, and no interference yet. And yet, at the same time, VOA is killed, NPR and PBS are threatened, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty are killed, and so the voices of the country to the rest of the world are being either muzzled or destroyed, and big media corporations are being threatened with, you know, interference in antitrust actions, et cetera, in ways that are having an influence on them, on CBS, on ABC, et cetera. It's a jumble of things that we don't know how to negotiate because we haven't been through it before. So we just keep doing our job and wait for the other shoe to drop. But my greatest fear is that sneaking sensation that maybe we just don't matter enough for them to go after us. We have to make ourselves matter. I mean, we have to really hit and dig and write the hell out of things and report the hell out of things, because I have not yet given up on the idea that there is a truth and that the truth still matters. It's very hard to hold on to that in the age of disinformation, social media, podcasting, and the incredible, what they call the ecosystem, a word I absolutely hate, which to me means a cloud of lies. It's very hard in that atmosphere to hold on to the idea that there is a truth and that it matters, but if we let go of that, then we're lost, so we can't.
Thank you for that. I want to go to something, Pat, you said something about sort of small acts of resistance, and I think I've been in a lot of conversations recently, and it's come up in almost every festival event I've been at, is sort of the question of bravery. And despite being the home of the brave. I actually think Americans don't think about bravery that much. We haven't had to. Some people have, certainly. There are many journalists who have faced many threats, and particularly Black and queer journalists in this country have had to be brave for a long time. But I think a lot of people are having a moment of, who am I going to be in this moment, and how am I going to react, and what is my institution going to be, and these sort of small choices that people are making. And I'm curious, first of all, because all of you have had to be incredibly brave to do the reporting you've done, whether in challenging your governments and your presidents, reporting from war zones. You've all had to make that choice. And I'm curious, first, if there was a moment where you sort of made a conscious choice to be brave. And second, what you would offer to other people, to Americans and to people who are trying to push back against this wave of authoritarianism around the world, about how to think about that and what to do.
I'm always troubled by the word brave because I'm not sure what it means. I can tell you I was afraid every day. Every day that I was covering, I was afraid. And I think a journalist who is afraid is a better journalist, because you fact check better, you bulletproof every sentence, you make sure your vigilante that you're interviewing isn't following you after, you make sure your sources have burner phones. Fear is a good thing for a journalist, but it makes you a really fucked up human being in the aftermath. So, I think for a while I was a journalist first, before I was human. But when you cover under those conditions, there's an almost paralyzing paranoia, like everything was dangerous. A credit card bill, you worry because people have your address. A doorbell rings, you're worried that there's some vigilante at the door. Every sentence that you say, you're worried you're wrong and you might get hit with libel. You're concerned that you had an error in a sentence that might get your witness killed. I remember the worst of it. I was landing in JFK, and I had to fill out a disembarkation form. And I couldn't trust myself to spell my own name. I had to fact check it against my passport. And then I thought I needed a second source, and I had to fact check it against my birth certificate, which luckily was on my phone. It's funny when I think about it now, but back then it was very real. And I say all of these things about fear because again, none of us are exempt. So it's just a question of choosing to publish after that. It's not a single moment. It's just going one day after the other. And what made me do it was bravery, not mine, certainly not, but of the people who chose to tell me their stories. I don't live with the danger that they were living with every day. I don't have a cop following me. I don't have a dead son and another son and a third son who might possibly be the next dead son. But they chose to tell their stories, and they chose to take those risks. And how dare I not, even when I'm afraid? So if bravery needs to be spoken about, it's the people who choose to talk to us, even when we say absolutely that we're not sure anything is going to come out of this story. You're not going to get justice. You certainly will not get donations or peace or hope or whatnot. You're just telling your story, and I'll try to do my best. So yeah, that's how I think of it. If they dare do it, how can I not? Also because possibly I have Catholic guilt.
I'm going to resist the temptation to congratulate myself for any bravery, because there really isn't a whole lot to say there. And in fact, we should really admit that a lot of the time journalists are vain, lazy, competitive, narcissistic. We like seeing our names in print. We like cutting the throat of our competition. And we like calling ourselves brave. And Trump has succeeded in convincing a lot of Americans that we are a special interest, that we don't speak for the country or for freedom or for democracy or for truth. We speak for ourselves. Like we're a class of elites. And I basically reject that, but there's like with everything Trump says, there's just enough truth to it that it can stick if you let it, if you don't fight it. So I would say we have to resist our own complacency. We don't know when the test will come. It may not be obvious. It may not be a matter of braving gunfire or buying a ticket into a war zone or writing something that you know is going to get you in trouble with the authorities. It may be the person that you should have talked to but you didn't because you didn't think they were important enough to talk to. It may be something very small that turns out to be a test of what kind of a journalist you are. And the fact that you don't know when it's going to come tells me that the most important thing is just not to assume too much about ourselves and instead to not be complacent. I think American journalists became complacent before the internet, and then Trump broke everything up. And we still don't have the, whatever you want to call it, the nerve, the inner resources, the guts, to know exactly what we'll do if it becomes like Duterte's Philippines or Erdogan's Turkey or Modi's India. We don't know, but all I'm saying is we shouldn't assume the best about ourselves, but we should also really be on guard against complacency.
I have an unpopular opinion on this, probably just, I wrote an op-ed in The Economist 3 years ago on World Press Freedom Day. It says, please do not call us courageous or brave, because in a way that expects this heroic act on our behalf, like we expected to shoulder your responsibilities of the citizens of this country because, oh, she will say it because she's brave, and you absolve yourself of all your responsibilities, right? Because the brave one does it. I mean, and you deprive me of my vulnerability, and you deprive me of my moments of weakness, and you deprive me of the fact that I am a very scared person. Every time there is a knock on the door at my house, whether there is an arrest warrant or there is a cop bringing a notice, I get anxious and I pop my pill. So I don't know if that makes me courageous or brave, and no journalist should be courageous or brave to be reporting the truth. Why are we creating an atmosphere in which journalists have to be brave to be journalists and doing their jobs, right? Nobody, I mean, I am guilty of taking many journalism awards which are labeled as journalism of courage, brave journalist, resilient journalist. Why should I be resilient? I don't have to be resilient. Resilient means that you can inflict pain upon me, you can inflict trauma upon me, and I have to keep bearing it because I have chosen to lead this path, and I have chosen to be a journalist. No, I did not have to be. I do not have to worry, I do not have to lose sleep about any court summon. I do not have to lose sleep about my family being affected, about deep fake images of me and my family, that I am ashamed some days when they have a deep fake image of me in bed with some politician. I do feel terrible. Why should I not feel terrible about it when my image is flashed across the country in a country of 1.4 billion people? It affects me. Even as much as I call myself a feminist, why should it not affect me? I'm a human. Don't take away my humanity. Right? Do not take away my humanity, because I don't want to be brave or courageous, because you use that, you weaponize that against me. The journalists who are really brave, I think, who do not also deserve to be brave, are the journalists of Gaza in Palestine. 200 killed, knowing what are the consequences, and continue to report every single day. I still have the privilege of being alive. I still have the privilege of standing here at this podium speaking to an audience. They don't have that. Many in this country, many in this world do not have the privilege of being here and speaking the truth out, right? So I think we need to kind of redefine what courageous and brave in journalism really means. We are just doing our job, and we should just be allowed to do what we are doing. Yes, it is courageous because we are living in unprecedented times for democracies, right? We are living in the age of Trump and Modi and Netanyahu. Yes, we are. So which is why you think we are brave. We are doing nothing extraordinary. We are doing nothing extraordinary. We are just bearing witness, and I hope history is just kind to us.
Thank you all. I've just been told we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to remind folks, if you have questions for our panel, to please use the cards that have been handed out and to give those to folks who are walking around, and we'll go to audience questions in just about 5 minutes. I do want to say, I think there's also, in the spite of all of these enormous challenges, I feel like there is also vibrancy in the journalism world. I think in the US we've seen a lot of independent, small, local, digital news outlets emerge in the face of sort of the collapse of a lot of larger local journalism outlets and the consolidation of larger media as well. I don't know to the extent if you agree that that's true sort of more globally, but I am thinking about, how do we also sort of continue to support the journalists who are facing such grave threats? How do we continue to foster and enable vibrancy and greater connection to communities in journalism so that we counter some of that irrelevance or disconnect as well?
Subscribe. That would be my most important bit of advice. Subscribe. Don't expect it to be free. It should not be free. If it's free, it's not worth very much. And look for it in odd places. We all know that local journalism is dying or has died or is moribund around the United States for a lot of reasons. And that is a terrible thing because we're blind basically to what's going on in some county in Wyoming where there may be incredibly important news being made, important corruption going on. So how do you find it? You have to be a little enterprising. You have to take your eyes off that dreaded X, which is there to make you sick and crazy, and to make you think the world is a cesspool. The world is partly a cesspool, but it's not entirely a cesspool, and X what makes you think it is. So get your eyes off X and look for news in unexpected places and subscribe.
Rana or Pat, any thoughts?
Money. Journalism is expensive. It takes time, it takes patience, and to do it right, you have to be able to afford to do it. So I'll say what most journalists will say. We need the funding, we need the time, we need the support. Is it possible? God knows. But if this is a wish list, I would like a lot of money to write 10,000 words across a year, publishable anywhere, with everyone approving my expenses. That would be lovely. Not just for me, but for every journalist out there.
Thank you. And I was gonna note actually, if we'd had a bit more time, that I think the Reporters Without Borders Index also talked about financial instability as sort of, it's the main theme actually. In spite of all the sort of more political or legal threats we're talking about, it's actually the financial piece that they've really elevated this year. Okay, I'm gonna go to some questions, and I'm gonna choose this one in part because it's a question I also had on my list that we didn't get to. Could you talk, and maybe Ron, I'll go to you first on this, about connections between autocracy and misogyny and violence against women? I'm sure you could talk about that for quite some time.
I think my smile said that. I don't think male journalists have the privilege of being accused of sleeping with every third person in the country, the most powerful person in the country, as female journalists are. Every time I break a story, I'm accused of sleeping with somebody or the other. And I remember at the launch of my book, Gujarat Files, this was in 2016, it was a literary festival, and somebody from the audience had the audacity in front of a big audience say, but Rana, you have this curly hair, you're glamorous, you go and people start speaking as it is. So all my hard work, everything that I did, I went undercover with 8 cameras on my body, took the risk that I did, was completely reduced to who I was with my gender and the way I looked at everything else. It's about the glam element that you bring to the job. And it's also, a lot of popular media is complicit in this by enabling this kind of narrative that if a lot of female journalists have their way. No, we do not. If anything, we are down the ladder when it comes to, I remember when I was joining journalism and I was joining this really big news channel in India. I was an intern and they gave me entertainment and lifestyle because what else can women do? And one day I went to the editor and said, I said, I'm really young, I know, but I really want to do politics and criminal investigations. And he said, Rana, to do that kind of journalism, you need to have a camaraderie with male politicians in India. They don't, get drunk with them, get secrets from them, get the explosives, get the scoops. For women journalists cannot do that. So that is how we start. On social media, if you see the top 5 terms that's been documented by ICJ are jihadi Jane, ISIS sex slave. I have been sexualized. Right? I am always, that image with Osama bin Laden is in a bed. Men will be accused of corruption, women will be accused of using their bodies to get their stories. Women will be accused of everything, like every single, I have a very public Instagram account, and there's an image of me wearing a beach dress with a virgin mojito, and that image has been circulating for the longest time as this woman who's a debauched woman who wears all these short clothes but is speaking for the Muslim community in the country who believes in regressive values. It's this idea, and I'm like, I want to tell them, hey, it's not like some secret, you picked the image from my public Instagram account, so people know who I am, but to kind of always pit me as a sexualized figure. The abuses against me are like, 1 in the 10 threats against me are of gang rape and explicitly mentioning how they will gang rape me, how they will come to my house. And there was a Twitter handle followed by the Prime Minister of India. Okay, the Prime Minister of India follows many such Twitter handles. He morphed my image in a very explicit sexual way, in a sexual act. And when I went to the cops, they said, but it's on social media, it's not in reality, right? It's not accepted as a reality. My friend Gauri Lankesh, a very well-known Indian journalist, was shot dead in 2017 outside her house, right? And a few days, probably 2 days before her murder, she saw my post on Facebook, which I used to use back then, and she said, Rana, don't bother about this nincompoops. They are accusing me of, slanderous stuff, and they're accusing me of, and sexualizing me. It's no big deal. It's only on social media. These are paper tigers. These are nincompoops. And 2 days later, she was murdered, right? So all these death and rape threats, and men don't get that. Men do not get rape and death threats. And I would really not try to trivialize this by saying it does not affect me. Of course it affects me. Of course it affects me that when they send me a message saying, oh, I saw you in the auto rickshaw that day, you were with your nephew, it does bother me. It does bother me that I could be the next person. It does bother me that my character is being it's like a virtual lynch mob out there to assault my character. Not that I care much about it, but it does affect me. So it is much tougher for women, irrespective it's a tougher world, irrespective it's a tougher place to be a woman journalist in a country like India. But it's tougher irrespective of the social media lynch mob that I have to concede I've started censoring myself. And I would be lying if I tell you that I am not censoring myself. I am censoring myself. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. Every time I tweet, I think 10 times about what if this case is filed against me? What if somebody accuses me of sleeping with somebody? It's a scary place for women.
And I think it's another example of where that rhetoric also coming from political leaders, which we've certainly also seen, is giving that permission, right?
One of the top leaders in India called journalists as prostitutes.
Right. Thank you. This one is for everyone. Do the laws in all of your countries still protect journalists, and do you worry about the future and the erosion of protection?
The law was the question?
Yes.
We have a First Amendment. It is the strongest protection of free expression in the world, and it is as good as the willingness of the public to support it. Absolutely. That's what we've learned.
Absolutely.
The Constitution guarantees that the state cannot interfere with the freedom of expression of its citizens. It is a great thing. I'm incredibly grateful for it. And it really is the strongest law in the world for free expression. And it really is only as good as popular opinion. And once public opinion decides that free expression doesn't matter, and by the way, this isn't just the uneducated masses. This can be the writers themselves who decide that free expression doesn't matter. They can, it's a sort of man bites dog story. They can turn on their own and on themselves because they don't want to hear certain things. Once the climate changes, then the First Amendment loses its force, because as we've seen, Congress, the courts, and certainly the executive branch can't be counted on to take it to the limit against an atmosphere that's hostile to free expression. So I'm clinging to the First Amendment, and I'm hoping that my fellow writers and journalists will do the same and not make it easy for the autocrats to take it away from us.
Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
No, I mean, my answer is very similar. I mean, I think we have the Constitution, but who really cares about the Constitution, right? So we have the checks and balances, but who's willing to? I mean, the public doesn't believe that we have checks and balances. The government doesn't care either. It celebrates the Constitution, but doesn't believe in the Constitution. So, I mean, I don't even know if there exists. Or, yeah.
Pat?
We have free speech in the Constitution, but in terms of applicable laws, libel is criminal in the Philippines. Cyber libel has a period where you can file a case of more than a decade. So every sentence you write, you could go to jail here. So are there laws protecting journalists? It's quite the other way around. So I think there's quite a lot of movement to address the loss, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Thank you. This one says, shouldn't journalists start mobilizing and being activists instead of recorders? Which I think is an interesting question. I know, Pat, there's, I think, a line in your book where you say at some point you have the thought of, I'm a journalist, not the resistance. And I think that's, a tension that I know journalists sometimes feel, but I'm curious how you all think about that question.
I think we have a job. And for us to do the job, we have to promise not objectiveness, but fairness and balance. And there's no way to do that. There are some ways to do that and be an activist. I actively believe we shouldn't be murdering citizens. I believe in free speech. There are values I hold sacred as a human being and as a journalist. But my job is not to mobilize. My job is to be there to ask people why. And to ask people why they stand somewhere else. I want to understand people. And if people mobilize because of what I write or don't mobilize because of what I don't write, then that's fair. There are difficulties. There are some very, very difficult gray areas. Not so much with mobilizing, but for example, you cover a crime scene. There's a wailing mother. You're asking her for her story. She's weeping. She consents. She tells the story. And then later she asks you if you can pay for the coffin. She suffered enough in front of you. You obviously cannot afford to pay for the coffin. It's a general good. Do you say yes or no? Or what if she just asks you to rent the chairs for the wake? You can afford it. It's the price of a couple of Starbucks coffees. What do? There's no right or wrong for most people. But I say no. Because I don't have a lot of rules left. And I need to hold on to the ones I have. And if I say yes to this, I feel somewhere that I'm buying the story. And that the consent isn't clean. Is that true? I don't know. But we don't have a lot of rules left. And if I start mobilizing people, I will have no rules left at all.
Thank you.
We should be activists for free speech, and that's it. If we're activists for everything else, we become less good as journalists. And that's not a philosophical or moral statement. I've seen it over and over and over again in practice, in the work of journalists and writers in periods when it was hard to resist activism, and they begin to lose the voice and the drive and the focus of what they're actually supposed to be doing. And in fact, it makes it easier for the autocrats. It's a bonus for the autocrats when the writers and journalists turn to activism. I know that sounds perverse. I think if you look at history and at our own country, it's true.
Rana?
We don't have to be activists to be good journalists, but I do think we need to make a clear distinction between the oppressor and the oppressed when we write our stories. And I think if that makes us activists, I mean, if we speak for the people who do not have a voice, if we speak for the marginalized, if I speak for my journalist colleagues in India who are jailed, I should not be called as an activist. I'm an active journalist, yes. But activism is not a bad word. It is not a bad word. It is what the media uses the word activist to kind of discredit you and say, oh, but she is an activist, she's not even a journalist. I do believe that we need, we talk about objectivity and neutrality in journalism, but when you see two sides and you see one side using all the state powers to target the marginalized, on the other hand, which has completely nothing to defend itself, you really have to, you as a journalist need to define that very, very clearly. Your voice should speak for the oppressed and not the oppressor.
That's journalism.
That is, but a lot of times a lot of people say, but this person did this, but also this person did this. It's like, you have to somehow create a false equivalence to kind of justify that thing. I think we should really be careful of the false equivalences we are forced to draw.
Balance is not our goal.
Yeah.
We're not looking for 50 of this and 50 of that. That's a false goal. Independence should be our goal. And objectivity, which is, as we know, a non-existent aspiration, but it's an aspiration that we can't afford to let go of. And there are times when American journalists lately seem to have wanted to. Those things have to be our guide lights and not activism, because I think activism leads to losing those things that are the core of what we do. And in the end, you will be on the side of the oppressed because you're a journalist, not because you're an activist.
Thank you. I think I just got the signal that we have just a minute or so left. The last question I was going to just quickly pose was, how do we get more of the public invested in the news? So if anybody wants to throw out a quick response to that.
I gotta say, Trump is very good for the business of the mainstream media. It's sort of a dirty little secret, but whenever he's in office, subscriptions go up, viewership goes up, and CNN has a little bit of a burst of health, and The Atlantic right now is doing really well. And when Trump is out of office, the opposite happens. Although The Atlantic actually did pretty well when he was out of office too. Fact, not bias. So what does that mean? Do we rely on an autocrat to sell stories? It's kind of an unhealthy relationship that we have with this guy, because we both know he knows he sells newspapers and gets audience, and we know it too. I would like to think that in a world without Trump, people will still be interested in the news. That's the test. Will you be interested in the news if Trump disappears tomorrow? I hope so, because there will still be news.
Thank you.
I guess we got to resist the temptation to be popular and just be ready to be unpopular, because that's what journalists, the public really wants to hear. The popular views are already there on mainstream news channels, by the dozen. So you got to be ready to be isolated, alone. Some days you feel insecure of yourself, you feel irrelevant, but know that the people out there really believe in your word and believe in the fact that they believe in you, and take that as a badge of honor, and continue to remain unpopular because they're holding on to your words. They're holding on to the fact that you are speaking on behalf of the marginalized. So don't give up. I know it's easier said. I think I have had the temptation of giving up many, many times, and someday I might give up. Who knows? I'm a human at the end of the day. But for their sake, and when somebody sends me an Instagram DM saying, if you lose, we lose, I feel like, hey, I can't give up. So that's all I can give to them.
Thank you. Pat, a last comment?
To the question of how to get people more invested in the news, I wish I knew the answer. I don't think there is an answer right now. I think we're all trying to find it. My answer always used to be tell a good story and tell it well. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe we're not telling the story right. Maybe I'm not telling the story right. But stories are still the currency. So I think we owe it to the people we cover to tell as compelling a story as possible.
Thank you. At the end of your book, Pat, you talk about how police officers in the Philippines often include a phrase in police reports when a suspect is killed. They say, the killing of the body becomes clear after the smoke of gunfire subsides, which, as you point out, isn't even really a thing. But I thought of that as a sort of metaphor for the smokescreen that repressive governments try to create around the truth. They hope to obscure reality and confuse us into thinking we're not seeing what we're really seeing. And I think our ability to pierce that smokescreen is essential to defending democracy and free speech and our ability to truly speak freely. So I won't thank you all for your courage, but I will thank you for piercing that smokescreen for us and for letting us see truth. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.